You cannot ask why forever. You cannot demand proof forever. Okay? There has to be a stopping point. And you are going to be the Muslim who is trying to convince me, right, of the truth of Islam. I see all of these women, they're wearing hijab, right? So why do they wear that? So women need to be protected.
Yeah.
So they're valued less than men because they need protection. I mean, don't you need protection?
Well, I'm wearing a shirt.
And as a human being, you experience spiritual growth by way of tests. AI will just have consciousness, you know? And I know you believe in God, you're a Muslim.
That's true.
But how do you square that? Like once AI has consciousness, what are we going to do with that? Won't that be kind of problematic in your religion, right? So the difference between artificial intelligence and artificial consciousness has to do with meaning, right? And that's something that you cannot replicate. Imagine someone said that, look, I am not going to believe what you tell me unless you give me proof. So how many people have heard someone say that before? You have to prove to me. I don't believe things like you Muslims, right? Unless you give me proof, because you just have religious belief, right? Whatever sort of way they use it. And they demand proof. Now the problem is, can you prove things indefinitely, forever? You can't, right? There's no theorem that is infinitely defendable. You can't say because this, forever, all right? I'll give you kind of an example which I usually give, right? Even though it's kind of dated now because my son has grown up. But imagine my son, Abdurrahman, he comes to the kitchen and he says, and he starts pulling out the knife from the cupboard. And I tell him, I say, Abdurrahman, put the knife back. So now what he says is, Baba, why? Now in essence what he's saying is, give me evidence. Like why? Why should I do this, right? I tell him, look, the knife will cut you. He says, why? Okay, i.e., I need more proof. I say, okay, look, because it's sharp. He says, why? I need more proof, right? That's essentially, I doubt what you're saying, Baba. I need more proof. I say, it's because the manufacturer made it that way. He says, why? I said, well, because, it's the manufacturer creates and makes knives so that we can cut things. Why? Well, because when you cut an apple, it has better utility and it's easier to eat. Why? Can this go on forever? No, obviously not, right? Because at a certain point, what am I going to tell Abdurrahman? Because I said so, and I'm your dad, and that's it. Khalas, get out of here, right? You cannot ask why forever. You cannot demand proof forever, okay? There has to be a stopping point. Something that you know for sure, but you cannot prove, okay? And those items are held in what we call the super rational, right? It's like someone said that imagine someone who says, I only believe in the rationality. I don't have any concept, this super rational stuff. This is all you religious people, right? I only believe in rationality. It's like someone saying that I have the perfect solvent. You guys know what a solvent is, right? Right? It like dissolves things. Okay, the guy says, it's a perfect solvent. Okay, fine, you have a perfect solvent. You still need a bottle to keep it in. So rationality can solve a lot of things. It's a beautiful thing, but you still need a bottle. You need one thing that is not solvent, one thing that is absolute, that which is not solvable, that which is not soluble. So you have something that is outside of rationality that you cannot prove, but you know for sure. There's other terms they use for this. Default positions. So in philosophy, for instance, John Searle, he's a philosopher of language and the philosophy of the mind, he calls these default positions, all right? Now, default positions are those things that you know for sure, but you cannot prove. And we talked about them earlier, the existence of the real world. If you tried to actually prove it, you would go mad, okay? The existence of your own self, the existence of other minds. Default positions are those things you know for sure, but you cannot prove. And they're part of the super-rational, all right? Now, let's apply some Islamic parlance to it, or Islamic terminology. And this is not working anymore. There we go. Okay. So what we would term super rational, that which is outside of rationality, is what we would call the fitra. Okay? Obviously, rationality is aql, and this is a quick translation. That which is irrational is ghayr aqli, or something like this. Okay? What you'll notice is that in order for rationality to work, you have to have super rational. In order for rationality to work, aql to work, you have to predicate it upon the fitrah. And this is why when you go through the Quran, you will notice that the Quran does not provide discursive reasoning. What I mean by that is it doesn't give you logical propositions. It doesn't say premise A, premise B, therefore C. Even in the argument that Hamza was mentioning from the Quran for the existence of Allah, it's not stated as a propositional argument. It doesn't say premise A, nothing, you were created from nothing. Premise B, you were created for something else that was created. That's not how it's stated. It's stated as a question. أَمْ خُلِقُوا مِنْ غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ أَمْ هُمُ الْخَالِقُونَ أَمْ خَلَقَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ بَلْ لَا يُوقِنُونَ. Right? Were they created from nothing, or did they create themselves, or did they create the heavens and the earth? Rather, they are uncertain. So, discursive reasoning is not found in the Quran. What is found in the Quran? Ayat. Right? Do we agree with that or no? Yeah, okay, all right, just making sure. All right, what's an ayah? Sentence. Oh dear. Okay. Verse. Okay. Someone else, help me out. What is it linguistically? What's an ayah? What does it mean? Science. Signs. Okay, very good. And I always find it interesting that people, they know this. Okay, it's a sign, but they don't necessarily know the value of a sign. All right. So let's now dig deep into the concept of an ayah very quickly. All right. How many people here are studying Arabic, by the way? Okay, a few of you. All right. You guys know, for those who are studying Arabic, that words generally have triliteral or quadriliteral roots, right? So the word ayah, does anyone know what the triliteral root is? What are the three letters that it's made up of? Ooh, so you guys didn't think you'd be tested on your Arabic, did you? So, alif, yeah, okay, there we go, right? Ayah. Now, these three letters, they combine to form other words that are similar. So for instance, when you want to say, you want to distinguish something from something else, you would use the term ayu. So for instance, when the person came to the Prophet ﷺ and he says, ayu a'mal afdal, which of these actions is the best? In other words, you have all of these actions. What distinguishes? What is the one thing I can take out? That's the thing I should do, right? So it's specificity. In other words, it's particular pointing at something. Now an ayah, the function of an ayah, it has two attributes, two concepts that you need to understand, okay? Before I tell you what they are, let me give you an example. So let's say that like I graduated from my undergrad maybe 20 years ago, okay? I'm very old. Anyway, so I graduated from a university called Michigan State University. Anyone heard about it? Yes. East Lansing? Oh, I'm surprised. Okay, mashallah. All right. So I graduated 20-some years ago. Let's say now I've moved to Houston, Texas, right where I live, and I'm going through my old stuff. And as I'm going through my old stuff, I see my gown and my cap. All right. Now, as soon as I see my gown and my cap, immediately I'm taken to the day I graduated. I remember everything. I remember the fact that, that my last name starts with a T, and we had 250 students, and I had to wait all the way to the end because my last name starts with a T. I remember waiting and the anxiety of waiting. I remember my parents, Allah yarhamhuma, that they were in the front row, and they were like, looking at me and saying, "Wow, he actually made something of himself," right? I remember the look on their face. I remember the fact that I walked up, and all those things immediately come to me when I see the robe, okay? Now there's two functions here. An ayah, when it operates, number one, there's no information transfer, meaning you don't learn a whole subject and then you experience the ayah. It happens immediately, okay? Just like a sign. When you see a sign, you immediately recognize it, right? Number two, well, it's immediate and there's no information transfer. Those are the qualities of a sign. Now, when it comes to ayat, do you think ayat affect the super-rational or the rational? The super-rational. Which one, if you were to rank, like which is higher, the super-rational or the rational? The super-rational. In other words, ayat affect the fitrah directly. Rationality comes secondary. And that's why Allah chooses ayat and not discursive reasoning. So there is reasoning in the Quran, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying there's no reasoning. But what I'm saying is, of primacy, of the thing that comes first is ayat. Why? Because the goal of an ayah is to awaken your fitrah, is to uncloud your fitrah. Because getting to truth is not just a rational exercise, like we spoke about earlier on. It also involves a spiritual state. Okay? Does this make sense? Okay, good. Let's see if the clicker will work now. Nope. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to skip the very definition of fitrah because that's going to take way too long. All right. So, when we're talking about the fitrah and we're talking about rationality, the fitrah, so let me just mention one other thing. Other aspects of the fitrah. So you have logical principles. You also have concepts of beauty, right? So like if my wife and I are looking at a beautiful sunrise, right? And I say, honey, that is absolutely beautiful. And she looks at me and says, that is the ugliest thing I've ever seen. Prove to me rationally that it's not a rational concept, is it? Right? So beauty is part of your fitrah, all right? Certain smells are part of your fitrah. Because you can't give a rational justification for that. You walk into the room, right? Some of the brothers walk in and say something like, ugh, something stinks. And another guy walks in and says, take it in, bro, it smells amazing, right? You're like, what do you mean? Prove to me rationally, it's not a rational endeavor, right? It's not a rational function, yeah? So what I'm trying to say is that the fitrah, it has primacy, right? In order to get to truth, you need the fitrah to be in a sound state, and you need your aql, your reasoning, to also be clean and sound, okay? It's when you have both of these that you get to truth and certainty. Does this make sense? I know I've said a lot of words right there. Yeah? So I feel like I'm losing people very quickly. All right. So, if this is the concept of the fitrah, and the fitrah can be clouded over, then how do you remove those clouds? What you'll notice is that rational arguments are only one way in which you can uncloud the fitrah, or bring the fitrah to a normal state. Okay? Among them is also revelation. Here what I'm talking about revelation is not the rational arguments of the Quran. I'm talking about Quranic beauty. All right? Do you want an example of this Quranic beauty? Okay. So let me skip ahead and we'll jump here and I'll mention this very quickly. So if you remember, on the components of a worldview, we talked about anthropology, which is who or what is man. Are we just material matter, or do we also have a soul? Okay? Now, one of the concepts, I'm not going to get into it, but one of the concepts that's very important to understand when it comes to who or what is a human being is a question about who or what you are specifically. Okay? For instance, when I say that this is my hand, who is the my in the sentence? I want you to think about this, right? If, let's say, God forbid, I get into a car accident and I lose my arm, am I still me? Okay, if I lose my other arm, it'll protect me. Am I still me? Okay, if I lose my legs, am I still me? All right, what makes me, me? Is it just this material matter? It's something deeper, right? From the Islamic understanding, it is the ruh. Okay? And that's where you have consciousness. Your inner subjective state comes from, it's attached to and part and parcel of your ruh. All right? When I say inner subjective state, I'm talking about something like something that is personalized to you that you know, but you can't share with anyone else. For example, so what's the color of the chairs here? Red. Everyone agrees they're red? Okay. Red is a linguistic term. It's a word, right? Can you know that the red that you see, the color you perceive, is the same color that I perceive? There's no way to know that. You cannot become me and see through my eyes and say yes. For all you know, the red that you see, I'm seeing it as green. But because we share the word red, I see green as red, you see red as red. That is an inner subjective state. That's you and your personality, you and your inner subjectivity. Now, in terms of how you know what you know directly is of a higher value than what you know indirectly. All right? I'll give you an example. Do I like broccoli? What do you think? The answer is I don't know. Right? Like I haven't said anything about broccoli, right? Okay. Am I having a headache? Don't know, right? Now here's the thing. Let's say I told you I'm having a headache. The only way you know that is by me telling you that I have a headache. But let's say you wanted to convince me that I don't have a headache. And let's say you give me all the logical propositional arguments in the world. You put me in an MRI machine and you take me through it, right? You do a full neurological scan of my brain. And you say, look, you are not having a headache. If I am having the headache, do you think all the rational proof in the world could convince me otherwise? No, because that is a direct experience. So your direct experience has a higher state in terms of what you know than just knowledge that you get by way of logical propositions. Okay? And this becomes important because your spiritual states are internal. What do you think about that? What you know and experience spiritually, internally, has a higher epistemic value than what you know by logical propositions or propositional logic. Okay? Now, why am I mentioning this? So the ruh is where we have consciousness. All right? Now this is going to become important. That being the case, so this is what's known as identity metaphysics, but I'm not going to skip all of that and skip all of this. Okay, here we go. So these are ayat from Surah Sajda. All right? Before I kind of get into them, there's a concept which is known as iltifat. Anyone know what this is? Anyone heard of iltifat? Iltifat is grammatical shifts. Okay? It's when Allah's speaking and He moves from, let's say, the singular to the dual to the plural. Right? So or He can move from first person to second person to third person. These are grammatical shifts. Now, do we think that when Allah makes grammatical shifts, that they have no purpose? Of course not. They have to have some sort of purpose, right? Okay, let's take a look at the ayat in Surah Sajda. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts off, He says, الَّذِي أَحْسَنَ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ خَلَقَهُ وَبَدَأَ خَلْقَ الْإِنسَانِ مِنْ طِينٍ. He who perfected everything which He created and began the creation of man from clay. All right, is this ayah in the first person, second person, or third person? By the way, I have to do some review here. What is first person? What does that mean? I, right? What is second person? You. What is third person? He, she, it, they, right? Okay. What is this in? First, second, or third? Third person, right? Okay, the next ayah, right? ثُمَّ جَعَلَ نَسْلَهُ مِنْ سُلَالَةٍ مِّن مَّاءٍ مَّهِينٍ. All right, and then He made His posterity out of an extract of a liquid disdain. First person, second person, third person. Still in third person, right? Okay. Then Allah says, ثُمَّ سَوَّاهُ وَنَفَخَ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحٍ. And then He proportioned him and breathed into him His ruh. First, second, third. We're still in third. All right. وَجَعَلَ لَكُمْ السَّمْعَ وَالْأَبْصَارَ وَالْأَفْئِدَةَ. And then He made for you hearing, vision, and hearts. Little are you grateful. First, second, or third? Second. Why? ليش? Why? Because now you have a soul and you have a consciousness. Do you see that? Right? And these are the kind of the subtle elements of the Quran that you have to really pay attention to. Now that you have a ruh, now you can be addressed. Because before that, you were just material matter. Make sense? Okay, good. So, I'm going to try this again. Should we try again? All right. So very quickly, where did I want to go with this? Okay, we're going to skip all of this for now. Okay. Let me touch one other thing before I open it up. And this, again, so what you'll notice very quickly is that my discussion becomes a little more Quranic than Hamza sometimes, right? So I hope you don't mind. Like, I can bring in the philosophy, but, I think it's just more of my style. Let's put it that way. Okay. So I'm not going to get into the depth of this ayah, but what I will mention is the following. Let's see, where did I want to go? Yes. The summary of this ayah, right, as quickly as I can go through it, if you wanted to draw a diagram, it would look like this. Okay? Again, I don't have time to get into all the intricacies of the ayah, but just trust me on the diagram. Okay? In other words, you have a heart, a qalb, all right? And the ruh is that which is trying to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all right? Outside of that, you have your nafs, or your desires, okay? This material constitution that we have, it is where desires are housed. And I want you to, this is a subtle point, but it's an important point. So therefore, your desire to eat, to sleep, to procreate, all comes from your material constitution. And like this, we are the same as the animal kingdom. All right? Don't go nuts and like, oh my God, astaghfirullah. He believes in evolution, kick him out, right? That's not what I'm saying. Your material constitution is where your desires are, okay? So, when you want to support your material body, how do you do that? You do that by what? Eating food, right? All right. Where does food come from? What's the source of your food, man? Where does it come from? Plants. Okay, where? Like, where is that? All that comes from where? The ground, right? Dirt. Okay? What does your material constitution come from? Dirt. So the source of your sustenance is the source of your body. Okay? What is the source of sustenance for the ruh? And where does it come from? All right. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ. They ask you concerning the ruh. قُل, say, الرُّوحِ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي. Say that the ruh is from the command of Allah. It's from the amr of Allah. Right? Okay. If that's the case, how does Allah issue commands? How does he do that? إِذَا قَضَى أَمْرًا فَإِنَّمَا يَقُولُ لَهُ كُن فَيَكُونُ. When he wants to issue a command, he says, be, and it is. So, the source of the ruh is the kalam of Allah. If we want to give sustenance to the ruh, how are we going to do that? By the kalam of Allah. Do we have access to that? Absolutely. So if you consider your constitution like a rider on a horse, okay? The horse is your material body. The rider is the ruh, okay? If you think about something like Ramadan, in Ramadan, what happens? So 11 months of the year, you are feeding the horse, correct? And the horse is very, very, very strong. How much Quran are you doing during the year, typically? Probably not that much, right? So the rider is very weak, the horse is strong. If the horse is strong, it's taking the rider wherever it wants to go. But in Ramadan, what happens? Allah flips the script. During the day, you stop feeding the horse. And what do you do at night? You start feeding your ruh by Quran all night. So you strengthen the rider and you weaken the horse. And this constitution, this is where we understand the enormity and the relationship between the heart and the Quran. It is not just a rational endeavor, and we're not rational robots. What sort of relationship you have with the Quran means you have a relationship with the truth. And you're able to see truth, as I mentioned earlier with the dua of Umar ibn Khattab. Right? Oh Allah, show me truth as truth. Allahumma arina al-haqqa haqqa wa razukna ittiba'a wa arina al-batila batila wa razukna ijtinaba. Right? So that is now the anthropology, which I breezed through as quickly as I possibly could. There's a lot more to say here because this gets into things like how do we understand miracles, right? But we can take that up in Q&A if you want. But this is also related to how we understand concepts that are outside of the natural world. And there's a whole process in terms of creative, how it's created and so on. I'm not going to get into that right now. Okay. Any questions before we move on to the interaction? Everyone's good? Okay, now this, oh, we have a question. Yes. Nice and loud.
So if you're going to explain the industrial alignment with this diagram, how is that?
So the thing is, this diagram doesn't give you the entirety of the word nafs. It's giving you one meaning of it. But nafs is used in different contexts in the Quran, right? Nafs can mean self, it can mean your desires, and it can also mean the entirety of the balance between the ruh and the nafs. And based on that balance, you'll have nafsul mutma'inna, you'll have nafsul lawama, and so on. But it's based on the relationship here and the usage of the term nafs in the context it's being used in. Yeah, makes sense? Any other questions? It's a good question. Okay. All right, you guys ready now? Because now it gets to be fun. All right. Okay, so here's how this is going to work. I am going to pick a character. I shouldn't say character. I'm going to pick a person. And you are going to be the Muslim who is trying to convince me, right, of the truth of Islam. All right? Is that fair? Of course it's fair. You're Muslims. You should be doing this anyway. Anyways. All right. So someone give me a name. What's a common name for non-Muslims here?
John.
John. Why does everyone pick John? I know a lot of Muslim Johns, by the way. I know John Fontaine and a few other Johns and Joes. Everyone picks them, but anyways. Okay, I'll be John. All right? So let's say, how many people are studying at university? So you got a few of them. All right, do you guys interact with non-Muslims here?
Yes.
You do?
Yes.
Okay, so let's say I'm John and I'm studying at university. So who wants to be my first volunteer? All right. You want to go first? Okay, Faddal, come on up. All right, mashallah. You want to grab the mic? Okay, so let's say, just grab and come close, man. I'm not going to bite. Don't worry about it. All right. Okay, so let's say,
Yes.
all right, so your interaction with non-Muslims, like where do you often interact with them? Or do you interact with them?
I do interact with them.
Okay, where would that be?
Mostly at Masjid Wilaya.
Masjid Wilaya?
Yeah, Masjid tour program.
Okay.
And in school also during my psychology class.
Okay, good. So are you studying psychology?
Part of my study is psychology.
What's your major?
Computer science.
Computer science.
Yes.
Those are very different than psychology. Unless you're studying some sort of funky AI, which is like, how do we know the human being? Anyways, okay. So we'll go with your psychology class, right? Let's say you have a class project with, what'd you guys say, John? Is that what you said?
John.
John, right? Okay, so let's say we've been working for some time. And so then, what's your name?
Ubada.
Ubada.
Yes.
Ubada, how's it going, man? How you doing?
Alhamdulillah.
Are you ready for our project?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
All right, good. So I had a quick question for you, though. You know, I know we're here, and you know, I see all of these Muslims, and I took the Masjid Wilaya tour. Great tour. Great people that are doing the tour. You know, you all know who you are. Anyway, but I had a certain question,
Okay.
and I was wondering, because I've been looking at Islam and things like that. I see all of these women, they're wearing hijab, right? So why do they wear that?
Okay, imagine this, okay? You have a piece of cake on the table. If you
Okay.
leave the cake uncovered,
Let him,
Sorry, sister.
let him finish his example. Let him finish his example.
okay, you have some food on the table.
Okay.
If you leave it uncovered, what will happen? There will be flies on the food, right? But
Sure.
when you cover it, it's gonna be protected.
Okay.
So it's gonna be protected from the eyes, from the whatever other people are thinking. So
So women need to be protected.
yeah,
So they're valued less than men because they need protection. I mean, don't you need protection?
Well, I'm wearing a shirt.
But they seem to be more covered than you. Like your ears and your your ears are there, and then you got your neck is showing. What's going on there?
Well, there are different rules for men and women. Women are not allowed to look at men, but we men, we're allowed to go out publicly.
Women are not allowed to look at men.
I think so. Right?
You think so? There's no phone a friend here, man. It's just you and John. Yeah, it's just me and you. Phone a friend, like, hey man, what do I do? Okay, so say that again. Like I missed that. Did you say that women what? What was that?
Men are not allowed to look at women.
Oh, men are not allowed to look. Okay, all right. Because I thought you said women are not allowed to look at men.
I don't know if it goes back and forth. I have to research a bit more.
I see. Okay, so men are not allowed to look at women.
Yes.
Okay, and
That's why they cover up.
because you're not allowed to look at them.
Because what if we
But if you're not allowed to look at them, then why cover?
What if we look at them accidentally?
Accidentally.
Yeah.
So you're not allowed to like even an accident is not allowed.
I mean, first glance and then you just look back, say, stop the accidentally.
He seems like one of those brothers that like his first glance is really long. It's like, whoa, wait, I'm good for right now. Okay, I'm just messing with you. All right, so they cover because you can't look at them? I'm not following the logic
They cover
here.
to protect themselves
Protect themselves from what? The sun? Like, I don't get it.
from other men.
Other men.
Other men.
Okay, like what do you mean? Like if another man tries to attack her, she'll
The
be like,
only
hijab.
person that can look, the only person that can look at her is her family, her mother, her father, her brother, and her husband. But other men that are allowed to marry her cannot look at her. That's why they protect themselves.
Okay, they protect themselves from men who are allowed to marry them.
Yeah.
Okay, so they need protection. In other words, they're like they're weaker. Yes? No?
They're not weak.
They're not weak.
They're not weak.
So would you be okay? Like I was reading this about these crazy people in the United States, and they're okay with having like trans women compete in women's sports. Are you cool with that too? Because you said they're not weak. So clearly they can compete in men's sports too.
Where did trans come from?
So is that what you mean? Like they're just as strong as men?
No, not physically.
Not physically.
Physically, some woman can smack me down right now, but
Okay.
mentally, I meant.
They're mentally weaker than men.
No weaker, no weaker.
Oh, okay. Mentally.
I'm gonna get beaten up.
So what are you saying, man?
No,
I'm very lost, by the way. I'm very lost.
Forget the woke.
Okay. The woke and the weak. Okay, we can forget both. All right.
Forget strong, weak, everything.
Okay.
We're equal.
Equal.
Yes. But
they have to cover and you don't.
Because they're females.
So you understand how that's not equal, right? Like how come you don't have to wear hijab?
Because I don't need to cover any, I'm wearing a shirt.
But you don't have to cover like they have to cover?
Huh?
I mean, you don't have to cover like totally.
I don't have to cover totally.
That's what I mean. So how are you equal? Like shouldn't your dress be the same?
No.
No. All right, give him a hand, man. That was good. Okay, how would you approach this differently? Let's get some feedback now, and probably from the sisters. I think I should probably focus here. How would you have done that differently, or would you have done it differently, or do you think it was a magnanimous, an amazing dawah scenario here? So none of the sisters would have done that differently.
I would have done it differently.
You would. Okay, so what would you have done differently?
So the first thing I would do is to tell people that this is the command of Allah. And that
Yeah.
Allah knows best, and whatever He commands, there's wisdom in it. And then things like that get explored and stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay, good. How many people agree with that approach? I think most people agree with that. Okay. Now, the reason why that approach is better is because that is a more honest approach, right? So like I asked my wife, I said, look, if Allah didn't command you to wear hijab, would you wear it? She said, no way, right? Like I would know. Like why would I do that? said the reason I wear it is because Allah commanded me to wear it, right? That's a more honest response. But where can this response go to next? The next answer would be like, well, do you just do whatever Allah wants? And the answer to that is, yeah.
Yes.
Why? So now you've taken the discussion from being about modesty and everything else to being about Allah. Everyone good with that? Everyone understand that? Yeah? And frankly, that's where you want your discussion to be anyway. All right? The trick is, or the problem is when you start getting questions that go back to worldviews and things like that we were talking about, then taking the person to understand your worldview, that's where it gets a bit challenging. All right, who wants to go next? Maybe from one of the sisters. And by the way, I don't need hands. I'll just pick. I'm not Hamza. He's like, oh, I'm looking. I'll give you like 10 seconds, or I'll just pick a random person in the audience. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Sister right there. All right. Would you grab the mic? Actually, would you grab this one? Here you go. I'll take that one. Jazakallah khair. You don't have to come down. Yeah. All right. What's your name?
Hazima.
Hazima. What do you do? Like, are you a student? Are you working?
I'm working, yeah.
You're working. What do you?
I'm working as a doctor.
A medical doctor. Okay. All right. Nice. Do you have interaction with patients who are not Muslim? You do. Okay. All right. So let's say I'll be. What do you guys think? Who should I be?
John.
I can't keep being John, man. Poor John. He's already confused with the last sentence. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. All right. I've got to be someone else. How about I'll be Frank? Frank is good, right? Okay, so I'm Frank, and I'll come in to see you. All right, as a patient. So let's see. What would be the? Okay. So let's say that I've been. I don't know if this is your specialty, but let's say I've been diagnosed with cancer. All right. And so I come in and we're, I guess I'm talking to you and I say, so listen, I wanted to ask you a question, and you're Muslim, right? Okay. I have a lot of trouble in believing in a God, because frankly, I think I'm a decent person, right? Like, I've done a lot of good for people. I help them whenever I can. I'm a really nice person, and I don't know why, if God exists, that He would do this to me, make me go through all of this.
All right. So the question is, why you, basically? Is that what you're
Well, I mean, if God exists, why would He put me through all of this?
saying? All right. Okay. I guess I would go on the route where, well, being a doctor, I would explain.
Wait, you're talking third person now.
Third person.
I'm Frank, so just talk to Frank.
I'll
Yes,
just talk to myself then, I'm sorry.
that's all right.
So Frank, firstly, I'm sorry about your diagnosis and everything.
That's right. Thank you.
I'm actually not the best person to talk to you about the relationship.
So, okay, let me ask you this.
and
If you had a relative and they
Yeah.
came to you,
Yeah.
what would you tell them?
I would just tell them to go get treatment, basically.
And that's it?
Uh,
It's like, doesn't your faith inform you in any way, or?
Well, I think faith is a different for every human being. And
Okay.
of course, I have my views on faith and disease and why you and faith and everything.
Right.
And if you ask what I think about it.
Well, that's what I'm asking.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I'm Muslim. So,
Yeah.
we believe if we have challenges or obstacles that come our way,
Okay.
it's basically a test for us.
So why would God test me?
Well, only God can answer that.
Okay.
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
But it's basically God thinks that you have the capabilities of going through the test.
Okay.
That's why He decides to test you. it doesn't mean that you're a bad person, or if you're less than any other person. It doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It just means that you've been chosen to be tested.
Okay, so it's just random.
I would say so.
So it's just random. There's no sort of rhyme or reason. God just like you, yes, you no, you yes. I'll test you. I won't test you.
Everybody has different tests in their life, you know.
Like what do you mean?
Well, they could have, in your case, you would have diagnosis.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
other people might have issues with family or financial stuff.
So what about like people that are rich? I mean, they don't have any tests.
Oh, you don't think rich people have problems?
I mean, they do, but they're not dying of cancer.
Well, maybe not yet. But
Not yet. Yikes. Okay.
Everybody has their own problems.
Okay. All right. All right.
So from a Muslim point of view, everybody has their own challenges.
Okay.
Whether you can see them or you can't see them. So, yeah, that's my perspective.
Okay. All right. All right. Thanks. What do you guys think? Good. Yes, no, critique. By the way, if you're getting critiqued, it's not because of a bad thing. It's actually, it's part of the learning process. Like I went through it and all that, so don't worry about it. So what do you think? Could that have gone better in any way? Okay, how? So let's say you were in that situation. Someone help her out. What happens if I said, look, why does God exist? You know, if God is so good, right, and He knows everything, and He's powerful, obviously He has capability over everything, then why would God do that? So how do you respond to that? Yeah.
We can respond.
Wait. The guy behind you had the. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I would go into the direction that you have limited knowledge, and you might not understand the wisdom behind any afflictions in your life.
Okay. All right.
Actually, the suffering that you're going through, Islam can give it meaning.
Okay.
So if you don't believe in God at all and you're just some atoms, then who cares? You're dying of cancer, not dying of cancer, it's the same thing really.
Okay.
But in the Islamic worldview,
Yeah.
Allah tests you in order to see how you handle and how you perform. If you choose to be patient, then you will be rewarded
Okay.
for your patience. And the life itself is temporary anyways. And like in the hereafter you have the ultimate decision.
Okay. All right. All right. Good. Anyone else want to add to that? Or yeah, the person next to you wants to add. Yeah.
So Allah tests you because Allah want to make you a better.
Wants to make me a better person.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Allah want to leverage your status.
Increase your status.
Increase your status.
Okay. All right. All right. Anyone else? Yes. Nice and loud.
Allah tests us as whenever is from Quran, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها.
Yeah.
Allah will not test us or challenge us out of our ability. So the test maybe will show that Allah is the greatest, as He is the only one who can solve the problem. And
Okay.
the test also can make us come closer to Allah and seek help from
Come closer. Okay. But what if the person doesn't believe in Allah?
I'm a bit unsure of.
Unsure. Okay. All right. Anyone else want to add to that? Nobody else? So you think that answer was pretty solid, sufficient, good to go? Okay, so we have a brother here.
We should go back to the purpose of life.
The purpose of life. Okay, so how would you do that?
So first of all, we start with we believe in God.
Okay.
Okay, and then if let's say we believe He
Yeah.
believe in Allah.
Okay.
So we try to explain to them why Allah creates us.
Okay.
One of it is life is a test,
Okay.
and then He wants us to worship Him.
Yeah.
So in whatever things that we face in this world is a test, and then if we be patient with it, then there will be a reward for us.
Okay. All right. Good. Good. So, let me mention something here real quick. Okay. So the kind of the textbook answer, if you read Hamza's book, is what our brother said. right? Like Allah has the picture, you only have the pixel, that sort of thing, okay? Which is a good answer, but remember that just because there's a logical solution to the problem, it doesn't mean that you have now settled the emotional side of the problem, right? And that becomes very important, okay? So the logical problem, that's perfect, right? Because Allah is the most wise, and just because you don't know the wisdom doesn't mean there isn't one, okay? Logically, it's great. But remember, you're speaking to emotional beings, right? Psycho-spiritual emotional beings. So you have to bring in some sort of component, which I think you did a little bit, which was about meaning, right? And, you know, people, like a person having meaning and understanding their suffering has some sort of meaning. Because if there's no God, it becomes meaningless, all right? But there's another aspect of this that I'd like you guys to think about. So remember, we spoke about what a human being is. A lot of books that you read on spirituality, they actually look at the human being as being between angels and animals. Okay, like Imam al-Ghazali mentioned this, and the way they put this together, they say that if a human being succumbs to their material desires that animals have, because desires first and foremost are blind. In other words, there's no concept of an animal having a desire and then choosing to not fulfill that desire. All right, you don't see a lion hunting down a gazelle, and in the middle of the hunt, the gazelle says, "Stop! I find what you're doing morally reprehensible. It's terrible. Stop doing it." It's not a thing, right? Because they are working on instinct. Okay? Desires, in and of themselves, are blind. The only thing that gives us morality or gives us the ability to make moral choices is the ruh. So we said consciousness, we said moral choices. Okay? So coming back to this tripart division, you have angels, you have humans, then you have animals. When you look at the construct of the human being, that there's a ruh and there's a material body, if the person succumbs to their desires and they do that against the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they fall below animals. Because animals work on instinct. We're correct? If they choose to submit to Allah in spite of their desires, they become better than angels. So the potentiality of a human being can be better than angels, but all of that is predicated upon having free choice. So if you think about something like sabr, patience, all right? Can angels have sabr? No, they do whatever Allah commands, right? Do animals have sabr? No, they work on instinct. What is the only being that has sabr? The human being, and maybe jinn. We'll add them, right? But what you'll notice is that when Allah speaks about sabr, He speaks about it in very good terms. Inna Allah ma'a sabirin. Allah is with those who have sabr, right? Inna Allah yuhibbu sabirin. Allah loves those who have sabr. Why? Because when you have sabr, you are now making a choice that goes beyond, at a higher status than angels. Okay? Now, coming back to this problem of evil and meaning and all of this, how many people, do they have lobster here? Yes. Have you guys ever eaten lobster? Yes. All right. So you guys know that lobsters, they have you're going to wonder, why is this guy talking about lobsters? But anyways, I have a point, trust me. Okay. So you know lobsters have a hard shell on the outside, and they have a mushy body on the inside, right? Okay. When lobsters, when they want to when they grow, the shell doesn't grow. So what happens is that they have to go under some sort of rock or something. They shed their shell entirely, and then they grow a new shell. Okay? Now here's the thing. The reason why they grow a shell is because they start to grow uncomfortable in their original shell. They start, in a sense, feeling pain. If, let's say, a doctor prescribed to them Percocet or some sort of other antidepressant, right? They wouldn't feel the pain anymore. But guess what else? They also wouldn't grow. So one of the concepts when it comes to trials and tribulations, as the brother said, it allows for spiritual growth. Okay? Like I remember, and I may have mentioned this last time I was here, that there was a brother back in 2008 during the financial crisis. And he used to work in Silicon Valley. You guys know what Silicon Valley, yeah? People there are very rich. Like not rich, as they say in the States, buco rich. Right? Like they're like really, really like. So in 2008, during the financial crisis, he lost everything. Meaning his house, he had to take his kids out of private school, and he had to leave California, right? And so he was telling a sheikh about his story. He says, when I was leaving, I was pulling out of my house, and I decided for some reason to stop by the masjid. Now he has lost his entire retirement fund. He's lost his house. His kids are outside of school. In other words, they're not going to private school anymore. And he's in a really bad state. So he says, he's telling this to one of the mashayikh. He says, Sheikh, I walked into this masjid. He goes, I just wanted to stop by. He goes, all of a sudden I just fell into sajda and I started to cry and cry and cry. And he says, it was at that moment that I realized why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put me in that situation. Why? He goes, because Sheikh, if someone were to offer me 10 times the wealth that I had, I would not trade it for that one moment with my head on the floor in my relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In that moment, I wouldn't trade it. So sometimes Allah puts you in a situation to bring you back. Because what's at stake here is that spiritual growth, right? So when we use the term, okay, we're tested. No doubt we are tested. But you've got to give a little bit more than that, right? Say, okay, the test has there's a certain objective here, right? And as a human being, you experience spiritual growth by way of tests. That's just basic. And the fact that we have free will. So both of those things you can choose, and because of that choice, you can grow spiritually. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay, who's next? Okay, you want to be next? All right, come on down. Yeah, go ahead.
I just need to ask something.
Yes. All right, you can wait here for a second. Yeah.
Okay, just now you said that the approach is such that if the person believes in God, but what happens if God is not a premise in the person's life?
Right.
You talk about patience, you talk
Yep.
about tests.
Yep.
It doesn't apply to them, it doesn't click.
Right.
So how would you deal with that?
Right.
Sorry, yeah.
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
So this is where you bring the concept of meaning back into the conversation. The only way for this test to have any sort of meaning is if God exists. Otherwise, it's meaningless, like the brother mentioned. Because if there's no God, then you're just going through something which has no meaning whatsoever. It's completely just random chance, just happens to be you that you're going through something. But if you believe in God, then now you have a meaning to that suffering. It's like the Holocaust survivor, Viktor Frankl. He said that, he goes, if my suffering has meaning, then I can take on any suffering, right? Because if it's meaningless, it becomes suffering upon suffering. Because then what is it? It's you're suffering for nothing. But if it has meaning, then your suffering, you can actually go through it. Because there's, as they say, light at the end of the tunnel, right? So in fact, it is a case for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
But if they remain godless, then
then there's nothing you can really do, right? So, but your purpose is simply to bring God into the picture and show why that makes your life meaningful.
Okay.
That's essentially what it is.
Thanks.
Right. Allahu alam. Okay. So, what's your name?
Hadi,
Hadi. All right. What do you do, Hadi?
studying engineering,
Studying engineering. Okay. What kind of engineering?
robotics.
Robotics. Okay. All right. Good. Let's see here. So I think I'll be. Who should I be? Did someone say LeBron? Should be. What's his son's name? Bronny, right? All right, I'll be Bronny. Although I don't think he's doing very well, by the way. Anyways, if you know, you know. Anyway, so let's say I'll be. You're studying, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll be, I guess, one of your classmates. How about that?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, and my name's Brownie. All right. So I guess we will meet for coffee. Sound good? Okay. So Hadi, man, I wanted to ask you a question.
Go ahead.
All right. So like we're studying about robotics, and and I've been looking into like AI a lot, right? And so I really think that we're going to come to a point where AI will just have consciousness, And I know you believe in God, you're a Muslim,
That's true.
but how do you square that? Like once AI has consciousness, what are we going to do with that? Won't that be kind of problematic in your religion?
Before you say that AI can have consciousness, do you even know what consciousness is?
I mean, consciousness is consciousness.
Okay.
Okay, you tell me what it is. What do you mean by consciousness?
So first, understand consciousness, you need to have a baseline for what consciousness is.
Okay.
To say that AI is consciousness,
Mhm.
has consciousness, would mean that it has a will, it can choose to do stuff on its own, it has an internal way of, it has feelings, basically.
Feelings.
Basically.
So consciousness is related to feelings.
Not just feelings. If you ask me, from an Islamic perspective, I believe that consciousness comes only once you have something called a soul, and without a soul, you can't have consciousness.
Right. But there's no, that's not, you can't really prove that or anything like that. That's just that's outside of our scope. So I'm saying, like you said, choice, right? So obviously we're now programming cars to be able to make a choice. If they're about to hit a dog or they're about to hit an old man, they can make that choice, and that's where, you're seeing us move in the direction of consciousness. You said choice. So clearly...
That would have been a wrong choice of words then.
Oh, wrong choice of words. Okay. All right. So then what is consciousness? Why do you think we won't get to that stage?
Because I believe that consciousness only comes when something has a soul, or something is given a soul.
Right, but that's my point, is that's kind of a logical leap. Just because you're asserting it doesn't mean it's true, right? You're saying consciousness has a soul, and I'm saying, but consciousness doesn't have, there's nothing to do with a soul.
But then it's the same way, like you can't define what a soul is, you can't define what consciousness in itself is. You need a base for consciousness, just like you need a base for a soul. So if I say that we need a soul for consciousness,
okay,
say we need something for consciousness to have a base.
Okay, so without a soul, consciousness cannot be defined. That's what you mean.
If you have a definition, please let me know.
I would say that I'd like your choice of words about choice. That's one aspect, right? That you can have a conscious choice that can make decisions. I think a lot of that is related to consciousness. Don't you think AI is heading in that direction?
If consciousness is only choice, then yes, it's right. But
okay.
The fact is that it's not just choice.
Okay, so what is it? That's my question. Unless you're going to say it's a soul, then we're done.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Thank you. All right. Give him a hand, man, inshallah. All right, that's my pleasure. All right, how do you think that went? MashaAllah, okay, all right. MashaAllah, right? I agree with you. All right. Could it have gone better? Okay, how? Yes, way back there. Yeah, you.
Right, so I would explain to him that if you know AI, you know that AI is as much as how us humans give it. So whatever choice that the AI gives you, you will never reach a point that's better than a human being. So for example, you mentioned the dog and the old man.
Yeah.
It's based on what data and parameters we gave him.
Sure.
But it will make this choice. So it will never be able to have as much as a conscience as a human being. So whatever conscience the AI will have will based on the conscience of the humans who created it.
Okay. So what if the person comes, so can someone think of a retort to that? Like a response to that? No one? So if someone said, okay, so is it the same case with God? That God gave us what you call a consciousness, and it's only because the pre-programming is why you make quote-unquote conscious decisions. Why can't we have the same phenomenon when it comes to AI? I thought we don't.
It's because we are not God. God has given us conscience to make some decisions, to sort of know what's right and wrong in a sense.
Okay.
And we can only sort of replicate that from the conscience that God has given us, but we won't able to create something like this idea of consciousness ourselves.
Okay, all right. Everyone agree with that? Sounds like a good answer? Yeah.
For me, human can just manipulate matters,
Okay.
and then God, we can create something from nothing. So that's the difference between God and human.
Okay, create something from nothing.
Yeah.
That God can do that.
Yeah, that's
Okay, but let's stick with consciousness. So, do you think the response was, okay, well, you know, that it's what is pre-programmed, right? As far as I'm understood. And my retort to that was like, well, God pre-programmed us too, right? If he has total control over everything, there's nothing happens without the will of God, and therefore we are pre-programmed as well. So if that is consciousness, then why can't we have consciousness in AI?
Free will.
Free will. Oh, okay. Is that a risky endeavor to take the person down free will? Yes, way back there.
So basically, God has written our qadar, right?
Okay.
God has he's already written what's going to happen in our life.
Right, he's pre-programmed us.
Yeah. But
Yes.
he also left some places where he has decided to give us choices. Like if I was thirsty, I want water or soda. But God hasn't specifically written what I'm gonna choose. I can choose soda or water. But when it comes to AI, we program it. We
Okay.
program it specifically to choose either water or cola, like you said,
Mm-hmm.
running into the person, a dog running into an old man, or choosing
The
something
car.
else.
Yeah.
We will program it to do what it wants it to do, but on the other hand, as humans, we have been given the choice of free will and to decide which path we want to take. Like you said
Sure.
about the angels and the animals, we choose on which level we decide to stand and which
Okay.
we decide to go.
Okay.
Then AI, you program every single detail, so there's no chance that it can malfunction.
Okay.
But there's no way that unless you make a mistake, that AI will automatically, magically gain consciousness.
Okay. All right. Does everyone agree with this approach? You were here this morning?
No.
Okay. All right. Okay. Based on this morning, do people agree with this approach? Remember, we had a whole discussion on free will and determinism. Do you think this is a good approach? Man, you guys were not paying attention. I'm going to tell Hamza. I'm going to call him and be like, yo, they were not paying attention, dude. Okay, what would be the problem with this? What would be what would someone say about this? Yeah.
The whole concept of qadr is something we can't really fully understand, so we need to talk to a non-Muslim about it.
Yeah, it's actually a slippery slope to enter into the conversation of qadr. And the reason is, as we mentioned this morning, is that there's no way to solve the contradiction, right? Because keep in mind, this is why it's become such a philosophical quagmire. Because first you say that Allah is all-powerful and he has command and control over everything. There's no domain where Allah does not have control, right? Okay, what is free will? It's your choice to choose this or that, right? The whole concept of free will is that it's not been predetermined. It's free. So how do you reconcile these two things? And so what we say is that we don't have to. Okay? It's not a philosophical problem to solve. We said it has a spiritual benefit to believe in qadr. So the issue is that if you open this door, then you're going to be in a bit of trouble. Because then you can get into a qadr argument and you left the AI stuff completely, right? Okay. Anyone else? How else would you approach it? Yes? Yeah. Yep.
And he became a moral man.
Correct.
And he went to heaven. Although he was destined to go to hell, according to
Yes.
the prophetic tradition.
Yes. So what is?
So should we include that in the?
Of course. So I'm not saying we don't have free will, but I'm also not saying that whatever Allah wills is and whatever Allah does not will is not. My point is that you can't reconcile these two things philosophically. You can state it and you're supposed to believe it and you act upon it, but at the same time we realize that there's nothing outside the command of Allah. It's not something that we can solve. Like there is no example in the dunya that you can give of qadr. that's perfect. So sometimes people talk about like, oh, the teacher knows the test, right? How many people have heard this example for qadr? The teacher knows the test, and so therefore, but even that's not a perfect example because the teacher doesn't have absolute knowledge. There is a chance that the test could be, the guy could fail it if the teacher thinks they're going to do well, right? The point is, as we mentioned this morning, that it is not something that's meant to be solved philosophically. It is meant to have a spiritual benefit. I mean, were you here this morning, by the way, sister? You were, okay. So that's what I'm saying is that we believe that whatever Allah wills is, whatever Allah does not will is not, and that He is willed to give us a free choice, to give us free will, right? How we reconcile that, we leave it alone. In fact, there's a hadith, I believe it's in the Sunan of Abi Dawud, and it's where the Sahaba were discussing this, and discussing qadr. And the Prophet ﷺ comes out and he gets very angry, and he says, is this what I was sent with? Right? And they said, and basically the Prophet ﷺ continues and says, this is not what I was sent with. This was basically, you understand qadr as is, and you act as if you will be held accountable, but you understand that Allah has control over everything, right? Why? Because the purpose of qadr and its belief is spiritual. It's for you to manage the vicissitudes of life. And it's very empowering, right? So, okay, so now we've gone into qadr, which I didn't want to do. I want to come back to AI, all right? So how else are we going to deal with the AI issue? And by the way, it's not like it's not coming up. It's coming up very fast, right? So I think it's relevant. So how else you think this, is this a good, satisfactory answer? So far, like everyone thinks so?
I think we can go back to the animal and angel.
Okay.
The example before. Human being, we can control our desire. We can
Okay.
we can be patient.
Okay.
I don't think AI can do that.
Okay, so AI can not be patient. Okay. Yeah.
AI doesn't have desire.
Does not have desire.
It
Okay.
It can't have a desire. It can only be told to do something or not to do something.
So what if you program it to have a desire?
Then you have added that extra portion.
But then it
It's
goes
not-
back to the
it's-
original,
it's not-
the original.
It's not its own desire, because you programmed it to have. A
So
desire.
you understand how this can go back to the qadr, right? Okay. So can I give you a hint about how to solve this issue? Okay, the hint has to do with meaning. All right. Did you want to? You had your hand up, right?
Yeah, I was thinking AI doesn't have inner subjective experience.
Inner subjective experience. Okay, all right. Going back to consciousness, though, that's what consciousness is, right? Okay. So how many people have heard of the Chinese room experiment? Anyone ever heard this? You've heard that? Okay, what is it?
Chinese room experiment where you have a translator. You have a person who's given. Basically, the Chinese room experiment, if it's the same one we're talking about,
Right.
is that you have a person who's given, say, a table or a graph, which shows what letter corresponds to some other symbol.
Sure.
So he receives a whole book, say, letter by letter.
Yeah.
And all he does is look at the chart, look at the letter, and puts down and gives you the output as the new letter.
Right.
No matter how many books you give it, all it does is just sees the letter, sees what it has to place out, and keeps doing that.
Okay.
At the end of the day, it won't know anything that you've given it.
Okay.
I mean, it won't. It can't comprehend what has been given to it.
Does it know Chinese?
No, it does not.
No, it doesn't. Did everyone understand the example? So imagine you're in a room, right, the way the experiment's set up, and that the room is closed off, and there's like, let's say a person in there. We'll put a person in there. And the person has a chart of Chinese letters. And they say that this letter matches with this, right, in two separate languages, say Chinese and English, okay? And they've been given the whole chart. Every card they get that has a Chinese symbol on it, they look at this and they spit that out on the other side, okay? Now, they could do this by books, basically. You have books that are now, quote unquote, translated. Can you say the person inside knows Chinese? No. But they've effectively done translation. What's the missing component? Understand meaning, right? So the difference between artificial intelligence and artificial consciousness has to do with meaning, right? And that's something that you cannot replicate, right? Does that make sense? So when someone says like one day we will get to, it'll have consciousness, the main issue arises that then how will that happen? How will it have meaning, right? Because they're basically language games for those of you who have studied artificial intelligence, right? Okay. By the way, on a side note, artificial intelligence is one of those challenges that I highly recommend that one of you takes on, right, from the Islamic standpoint. And I'll tell you why, because it is absolutely insane what they can do now, right? I was told by someone that there's a company out of the Silicon Valley, and they have developed an app where you can choose to speak to and interact with a relative of yours who has passed away. I want you to think about this. How do they do that? Well, they scour the internet. They look at all of their profiles, right? Their Instagram, their Facebook, all of that information. They comb the entire internet. Okay. One of the other aspects that they can do is they can take, I think, about 3 seconds of your voice. That's all they need, and they can have a full conversation in that voice. So if they can do all of that, they take all of that information, all of those memories, and you pick up the phone, and let's say it's your mom who's passed away. You hear your mom. Hey, how are you? Do you remember when we took that trip to Disneyland and and you were such a little boy and blah, 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 blah? Can you imagine the psychological impact that'll have on someone? How terrible that is, right? And this is what's coming up. Now, this is in the domain of what sort of psychological impact it'll have. What type of impact do you think it'll have on Muslims that are going through doubts about Islam? If you think it's bad now, we're in for a real big shock. So it behooves us to actually get ahead of this instead of just waiting for it to like hit us and then we are reactionary, right? And it's really it's one of those aspects that when you look at the ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ, you'll find that a lot of these concepts are they're quite clear in a certain sense, right? Like I'll give you an example. There's a hadith. I spoke about this last time I was here as well. There's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ says, "La taqumu as-sa'ah," the hour will not be established, hatta, and he mentions a few things, and he says, "Yataqarab az-zaman," that time will be shortened. In other words, time will move quickly. Yataqarab az-zaman. All right. Now, as a phenomenon, how many people experience that? Has anyone experienced like, wait, time seems to be moving faster in certain scenarios than other scenarios? How many people have experienced that? Okay. Where have you experienced this? In what context?
When you're having fun.
When you're what?
Enjoying something.
When you're having fun, time goes fast. Okay, what else? During exams. Good one. Yeah, that's true. The time seems to just go really fast. All right. I'll tell you personally, when I'm in Houston, time moves really fast. When I get to KL, it seems to be going slower. And it's very strange. Like when I leave the US, it's a very weird phenomenon for me personally. Because it's like something's going on where people are they're not in a rat race. Like things are not like, okay, we have to get to the apex of efficiency, management, times. It's a little more relaxed. Now people look at that and be like, look at the Muslim world, they're so lazy. But I'm like, wait a minute. They can actually stop and enjoy moments, right? And time, from my perspective, moves at a slower rate, okay? Now, why does this happen, by the way? One of the ways to understand this phenomenon is by understanding how you understand where you are, your spatial reality, okay? Anytime you introduce any sort of technology, it's going to have costs and benefits. Without doubt, right? So if you've studied technology, you know this very clearly, okay? Even rudimentary technology. So if you can imagine now, before the advent of maps, okay, so maps is a very simple, rudimentary technology, right? It's still a technology. Before that, when you understood where you were, it was very direct and organic. In other words, it was basically where you're walking, where you can see you're going, position of the sun, and so on. Once maps are introduced, they have a type of phenomenological impact on you where now you understand where you are, not directly in terms of your organic space, but by way of the map. In other words, I think I am here. Okay? Does everyone understand this point? Now, that gets exacerbated when you introduce something like Google Maps. Because now it's not only dictating where you are, but now it's basically telling you what to do. Right? Make a left, make a right, and you're saying sami'na wa ata'na. Right? Like, right? So it's not only telling you where you are, it's telling you where to go too. Now the thing is, this is the concept when it comes to something as rudimentary as a map, that it's now changed your perception of space and spatial reality. And by the way, is there an objective, like we were talking about earlier, objective map? The answer is no, there isn't. Why? Because if you look at the map that we typically look at right now, where you have Europe on top, Africa's on the bottom, and so on and so forth, this is a map from Ptolemy. Okay, it's a Ptolemaic model of a map. But if you go to the 12th century and you look at Muhammad al-Idrisi, who's a cartographer, his map puts Europe on the bottom. Now you have to ask, why did one person put Europe on top, one person put Europe on the bottom? The reason is, it has nothing to do with what they thought was objectively real. It has to do with what they thought was dominant as a power. For Ptolemy, Europe, and whatever the interpretation of that was a dominant power that goes up and on top. For Muhammad al-Idrisi, rahimahullah, he is saying that Mecca is in the center and what's at the top is the African nations, because Islam is dominant there at the time, right? If you were to go to outer space, which one's top and which one's bottom? Nothing. Because there's no concept of top and bottom. But does this have an impact in reality? It does. They actually did some studies on how much it costs to move from north to south versus south to north in the US. Okay? Called what they call cardinal direction. What they found is that on average it costs $200 more to go from south to north than north to south. Why is that the case? Because when you are perceiving you going from south to north, it seems like you're going up a hill. Seems like you're going up a hill. And when you're going from south to north, it seems like you're going, so it's easier. So they actually charge you on average $200 to $250 more going from south to north, which is a cardinal direction, which has no basis in reality, by the way. You're not actually going up a mountain. But the perception you have that's dictated from that which is external tells you where you are, in a sense. It dictates where you are. Now, if that's the case with space, spatially where you are, the same phenomena happens when you introduce technology related to time. So before let's say before the advent of clocks, you experience time in a very natural, organic way that's based on the sun. Once you introduce clocks, now you can divide time into seconds, milliseconds, and so on and so forth. That, just like maps have an impact on space, where you are spatially, clocks have an impact on time. And the more you divide up time, the quicker your perception that it's moving. So that's why, at least I believe, that in Western countries where things are like, you've got to get it done, you've got to do it quickly, and it's efficiency and management and all of that, time has been divided, and that has an impact on your perception about how quick time moves. يَتَقَارَبَ الزَّمَانِ. Right? Anyway, so technology, my point in mentioning all of that, was that technology has a deep impact that has very real world consequences. And if we don't get ahead of it, you will find that this is going to impact the Muslim psyche in ways that you can't even imagine. I mean, if you can pick up the phone and talk to your mother who's passed away, that's phenomenal. Anyway, okay. Shall we move on? All right. Who is next? We should actually get one of the sisters next. Who would like to volunteer? All right. So I'm going to go to my 10 countdown again. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. You guys sweating bullets? 3, 2, 1. Okay, so what's your name, sister? Yes, you. What is it? Ainun. Okay, all right. Can you give her the mic, please? All right. What do you do? Are you studying? Are you working?
Yes, I am a student here.
You're a student here. Okay, what do you study?
Actuarial science.
Oi, man, actuarial science. Okay, that's interesting. So that's like relates like insurance and stuff.
Yeah, insurance.
Okay, all right, all right. Let's see. I'm gonna throw one out from left field here. I think it'd be very interesting. Okay, I think I have one. Who should I be?
Jack.
Jack? Jack seems very. You guys have very vanilla names, man. Jack and John and Joe and. You gotta come up with something different like Chad. Right. Oh, okay, I can be. Yeah, sure. What? Jane? Okay, I'll be Jane. Hold on. Okay. So I'll be Jane, and I'll be your classmate again. All right. So so I had a question for you, Ainan, and I wanted to ask. You know, we've been studying actuarial science, and I was reading somewhere that in Islam, interest is forbidden. So is that true? And isn't that weird if it's true? Because I mean, how do you transact without interest?
I would say yes. Actually, interest is forbidden. We can say in the context of riba.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in the Quran also it is mentioned that riba is not allowed in Islam. So that's why instead of going for conventional insurance policy,
Mm-hmm.
in Islam, most of Muslim will go for takaful. So takaful is actually
Okay.
they implement Sharia in the okay. They implement Sharia compliance in the policy itself. Means I remember actually the takaful is actually based on a shared pool.
Okay.
Where the aim is to help each other, which is aligned with the ummah, which
Okay.
the Muslim ummah, where when someone is have any difficulties,
Yeah.
so the other person who are involved in the pool, the shared pool,
Okay.
pool of money,
Yeah.
will help the person who are in need. Yeah.
Okay. So I guess my question was, why would God forbid interest?
I would say it's somehow.
Well, I mean, because the whole world works on interest, right? I mean, it's
Yes.
we're living in a credit-based economy, like everywhere in the world. It's not something you can escape. So, like, I get what you're saying, and that's the specifics seem very interesting, but I'm just wondering, like, why would God forbid interest? Like, it seems quite, you know, it seems anti-intuitive, to be honest. Like, you know, interest is part and parcel of everyone's life. So why would God want you to take away something that's so intrinsic to the human transactional reality?
I think if interest is implemented very excessively, this will lead to betraying the other person who was charged for the interest.
So it's only excessive interest.
Because for the conventional one, it's
Like a little interest is okay.
sorry.
So like Islamically, a little interest is okay, because you said it's like excessive. So yeah, that makes sense. I mean, if you're going to charge someone like 40% interest rate,
Yeah.
you know, with an APR of 40%, that's crazy, you know.
Yeah.
But I mean, like 1%. If I could get a home loan and get a 1%, that would be great.
Technically, in according to Islam, cannot. But actually,
So that's my question. Like, why not? Like, okay, excessive usury, okay, I get that. But you know, if I'm going to give you money and I've worked hard to save this money and I'm letting you use it, I mean, shouldn't I get rent on the money?
yeah,
Actuarial science, right?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, just making sure. We have like a whole group discussion here. This is not fair. This is like no one else got to do that. Okay.
I think because there might be risk of exploitation. Yeah, this is also, for example, gambling. Gambling is also not allowed. So
Yeah, so gambling makes sense. I get that. Like I've seen, like I know relatives they're just in really bad shape, right? But again, like if I'm going to buy a house and I can get like I've got really good credit and I can get a house, for let's say 5%, 3%, whatever, it allows me to buy a house. I can have equity in a house. I have ownership of the house. So I don't understand what the problem is. Like, why would God not want me to have a house?
I think because not everyone that we are dealing is Muslim, and they are not. We cannot expect them to apply this kind of thing, this kind of belief when it comes to maybe like transaction. For example, if you want to buy a house, and we cannot simply like say our religion does not permit charging interest.
Okay.
So,
So do you think it's ethically okay to charge interest, let's say to a non-Muslim? Or if non-Muslims do it, it's fine?
I think...
Do you think there's an ethical issue?
I think it can, because it can give some guarantee to the renter. Because, for example, if I lend some money to the person, and then to promise that the person will pay me back by the right time.
Okay.
There might be some very little interest fee.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. How do you think that went? Give her a hand. That's a tough one. All right. How do you think that went?
MashaAllah.
MashaAllah. That's his answer for everything, by the way. All right. Could we? What do you think? That was a good session, or how did that go? Any comments? Or that was rock solid? Yes. No, right here. Yes.
I think maybe the route that I would take is to basically explain to the person that sometimes when Muslims are refused to do something, it does not necessarily have an effect on the physical, but could also affect your heart in a way that participating in riba in any way, either the one who is giving or the one who is taking, it does have an effect on your heart. Like it can increase greed, or
but what if I'm just renting a house though? I mean, I'm not giving it to anyone. I'm paying the interest.
That's the thing. It does not. You do not have to have the effect on you only. There's many people that it affects. So even if you, as the buyer of the house, you're not able to see that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, it is bigger than just you buying a house. So it affects everyone and not just the individual, which is why it's refused.
So you don't think it's fair that if I'm going to, let's say, give my money to someone and let them use it, that they should pay rent on my money? Because I worked hard for that money. Isn't that fair?
It doesn't matter what I think is fair, because at the end of the day, what Allah thinks is fair is what goes. Because I could think it's fair just because I know you and I know you work hard for your money, but when you zoom out, the effect, it cancels out what you believe is fair.
Okay, so it doesn't really matter what we think is fair or unfair. It's just God decides it and that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay, all right, fair enough. All right, anyone else? Yes?
Just a thought. The principle of Islam is based on fairness and do not exploit others and take advantage of the pain of others.
Okay.
So that's how
So I agree with that. And so like I said, exorbitant interest, usury, whatever you want to call it, like 25, 30%. But 1%, 2%, what's the problem with that? By the way, I mentioned I graduated from Michigan State University, right? Yeah. Anyone know what my major was? Economics. Anyways, yes, go ahead. So what do you think? Like, it doesn't seem like it's you're not really taking advantage of someone. No? All right, anyone else? Yes, right here.
I think first my approach is I want to explain to them that we have a different perspective from the business perspective and Islam perspective in the business, which is we see that in the business we want to benefit for ourselves.
Right.
We want to maximize the profit. So we don't have the feeling to actually give a little of our money to others. But comparing to Islam, we actually see our community as a like family and relative. So when we see them not as a stranger, so we want to help them. So we're not trying to exploit others, and we're not trying to actually not giving the money. So when we help each other, so the community will become more harmony, because we actually have the sentiment that we all are family. So we want to help each other. And I read a bit about the Islam finance.
Okay.
When we want to like buy house in the Islam way, like it's actually have interest, but it's actually already like cleansed from the haram element, such as like riba, haram, and maisir, gharib.
Okay.
So that's the element after the cleanse, and it's actually still have interest, but will have a two-way profit, not just maximus for one party.
Right.
That's all.
Okay. All right. Good. All right. So let's do a quick debrief, because I think the brother said we're going to have a break for Q&A or something, right? All right. In all the answers that you guys heard, all right, in the questions that were asked, we talked about hijab, we talked about interest, we talked about all sorts of things, okay? Most of those issues were in what area of the worldview? Morality and ethics, right? Did we go on and on and on and on? Yes. Where was the mistake? We skipped all of this and went bam. And we tried to take their worldview and say, let me make it sense in your worldview. Do you see that whole exercise? It was to basically come to this point, is that we've studied worldviews this morning. The whole point is that if you're going to just discuss morality and ethics, you're trying to fit it, and they have the wrong lenses. If their lenses are green and your lenses are red, you could speak to them forever, and they will never see the tree as green because their lenses are red or whatever, right? You have to give them your lenses. So you have to convince them before you get to morality and ethics, ontology, epistemology, and so on. Right? Does that make sense? Like that was kind of the take-home point after all of this, whether they're talking about AI, whether they're talking about, the hijab, we're talking about interest. I mean, those are fine. Those are exercises that are fine. But the point is, you could get lost in these discussions because you missed the ball, right? You didn't keep your eye on the ball. What is the take-home point when you are having these conversations? What is your goal? What's the goal? What are you trying to accomplish? Yes?
To get them to have more interest in Islam and maybe follow it in the future.
Okay, to have more interest in Islam and follow in the future. Okay, all right, good. Anyone else? What is your goal? Yes? You were. Sorry?
Invite them to Allah.
Invite them to Allah. Okay, what does that mean?
We need to talk about the existence of God and so on. So that
Okay.
doesn't matter what the argument was.
Yeah.
You lead back to the first review with the anthropology, and then we can talk more about other things.
Okay, all right. What else? Yes?
To awaken the fitrah.
Good. Awaken the fitrah. Very good. Yes. Who else? See, if you take this point home, you've taken home everything we wanted to accomplish today. What is the core? Okay, let me put it in a different context, all right? You have a conversation with this person, okay? And they leave and they get hit by a cookie truck, okay? And they die. Is your conversation going to be good enough for you to be released so that Allah says, yes, you told them what they needed to tell? In other words, they stand for Allah and they say, I spoke to sister such and such, brother such and such. They told me about, what were you supposed to tell them? What will save them from the hellfire? Tawheed. Tawheed is going to save them from the hellfire, right? Not like, oh, do you believe hijab is ethical? Interest-bearing transactions? Let's say they agree with you. You know what? It's oppressive. Interest-bearing transactions, you're right. It's terrible. And boom, they drop dead. Okay. Is that going to save them from the hellfire? No. And hence, this was the entire reason, the exercise if you get stuck in morality and ethics, you're not meeting your own objective, which is to call them to Tawheed, which is rooted in what exists and how do you know, right? Does Allah exist? Is He worthy of worship? How do you know that? Ontology, those are fancy terms, but at the end of the day, the focal point is Tawheed. And by the way, this is true whether you're talking to non-Muslims, Muslims having doubts, or Muslims that are just not practicing. It's not like because once you attach the person to Allah, let's say ontologically and epistemologically, then they will understand concepts that have to do with morality and ethics. But if you start with morality and ethics, you're trying to superimpose in their framework, which by and large doesn't work. Right? So I'll tell you something. We had a Christian-Muslim debate in Houston some years ago, and one of the things I try to do is I avoid using the Bible at all costs, personally. Okay. Now the reason I do this is very much related to this. In other words, if you enter into a discussion about the Bible, what usually happens? For those of you who have had biblical discussions. Nobody's had biblical discussions? I guess you guys don't engage with Christians too much, right?
I do.
You do? Okay.
So the point is like the Bible has got like the what is disputed and what is not disputed, and
right.
then it's all a copy job kind of thing, and
sure.
then in a sense that lots of things get lost in translation. So in a sense that it's not authentic in that sense.
Okay. So if you go to, let's say, a Christian and say, look, man, your book's not authentic, how do you think that conversation will go?
I won't use that
okay.
as a premise, but in a sense that so when they bring this up,
okay.
When I talk about Islam in general, I always use the Quran as the premise, and they say like, yeah, but the Bible says this.
Okay.
And then I say like, okay, in Islam, why is it that we use the Quran as a premise? It's because of the fact that Allah stated that it's His word.
Okay. All right.
In a sense, yeah.
Okay. All right. That's good. That's good. In other words, it's a Quranic approach.
Yes.
Okay. So in this particular debate, I used a similar approach, which was focusing on the Quran. And the debate was about salvation. All right. So as you may or may not know, the Christian concept of salvation has to do with being born in original sin, and therefore Jesus died for your sins because everyone is born in a state of sin. Okay. Do we believe that? No, obviously not. We believe we were born in a state of fitrah, which is goodness, right? In a good state. And when we want to save ourselves, quote unquote, we ask Allah for forgiveness and Allah forgives us. It's very simple, very straightforward. Okay. So I presented the story of Adam alayhi salam from the Quran and so on and so forth. He was an African-American preacher, kind of rallied everyone up, like Jesus and all these, however they, just everyone's like, yeah, hallelujah, brother. Anyway, so he did all that. And then it came down to Q&A, okay? And the one thing that I wanted to kind of go at, or kind of, have him question, and have the audience question, is to go to foundations. Because this discussion is about what underlies where they're coming from. And so I wanted to kind of say, okay, look, there's a discussion about the Bible, right? And you can get into that, but you'll be in that discussion forever, okay? You interpret like this, they interpret like this. Why? Because you're using a Tawheedic worldview lens, and you're interpreting, God is one in the Bible or whatever, and they're interpreting it with a Trinitarian lens, all right? It goes nowhere. So when the Q&A time came, I mentioned something and I said, look, I will give it to you that the Bible is unchanged for sake of argument. You take it, it's yours, all right? I said, you have a much deeper problem. In fact, it is a problem that you can't crack. And the problem is this. We know that languages change over time, all right? No language is innocent of that, all right? Even the Arabic language, right? There's no one that speaks the Arabic of the 7th century Arabia, okay? Nobody. And so if you try, And if you go to the Arab world, people look at you very strange, right? If you start coming up and going, "Qad af," and people, what's wrong with you, man? Right? Anyway, so languages change over time. I said, when you look at, let's say, if we want to go to the original language of the Old Testament, and you say that it's Hebrew, the first Hebrew dictionary arises in the 10th century. That means not 10 centuries after Moses, 10 centuries after Jesus, right? Languages change over time if the first dictionary comes up in the 10th century. And that dictionary is based on a poem of 80 words. That's it. That's it. And then later on, they developed it more. And by the way, they developed it with an Arabic model. Because in the 11th century, they're still debating whether Hebrew should be triliteral, like the Arabic language, or not. And the first dictionary is in Arabic, by the way, the first Hebrew dictionary. Anyway, that's a separate point. The point is, if your first dictionary arises in the 10th century, how do you know what the text even says? So the problem isn't the preservation of the book. The problem is, how do you understand it? If we understand the phenomenon of a language is changing. Why I'm mentioning that is because sometimes we get caught up in the specific question and the specific thing that someone's asking us. And really what we want to do is say what undergirds their argument. What are their presuppositions? What are their worldview do they have, and how can I show that the worldview itself is problematic? So a skill, what we're trying to now kind of teach you guys, and hopefully you're taking away from this, is to be able to look at foundations. What is the foundation? And to be able to question those foundations. All right? Okay. So I think we have Q&A now. Is that? Okay. Faddal. Go ahead.